Good morning. Even though high noon has passed, I always say morning is an attitude. It is not a time of day, and I want to thank St. Joseph's. I want to thank the powerful spirit of the choir. Let's give them a big round of applause. And I am absolutely honored to be able to just share a little bit of time with you this afternoon. I want to begin by acknowledging, thanking my friend and brother Jay Augustine for his ministry, for his leadership, for his friendship. This is an enormously talented man, a lawyer, and someone who could have taken so many routes with his talent. To the C-suites of America, certainly to elected office, to the judiciary, but he chose the ministry as a place to serve. And even though he is a native New Orleanian, I want to just correct the record. While he's here, he has permission to be a Panthers fan. Brother, don't get yourself in trouble. And so I want to thank him. Let's give him a round of applause. Jay, thank you, brother. And right at his side, the First Lady, Michelle Burks Augustine, a longtime friend. Thank you. It's so great to see you as well. And to the leadership of the AME Church, to the trustees and deacons and members of St. Joseph's, to all of the elected officials, the soon-to-be elected officials. We're naming it and claiming it this morning. And to all who are here, I cannot come to an African Methodist Episcopal Church without proper and due acknowledgement of Richard Allen. And proper and due acknowledgement of Absalom Jones. For those of you who may not know who I am speaking about, these are two free black men. Way back in 1787 in Philadelphia, at the same time that other men were meeting at Independence Hall to draft the Constitution of the United States, created the Free Africa Society. And while other men were meeting at Independence Hall and penning the incredible words that in the philosophy that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones had the audacity to believe it was true. Yet when they went to worship at the Methodist Episcopal churches in Philadelphia at that time, they were torn from their knees, banished to the upper rafters, and said, "You don't belong here." So how did they respond? They responded by saying, "You know what? We will stand up our own institution, our own church." And in 1794, they created Bethel, which is now Mother Bethel, and created the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And everyone didn't like it. They had to sue in 1807 and again in 1815 in the courts of Pennsylvania to achieve status as an independent denomination. And that history is crucial to the history of today because it took audacity. But it took audacity and this interesting contradiction. They challenged the system while at the same time believing that the words that all men are created equal applied to them. So I have to acknowledge on this afternoon, yes, we are 200 plus years later, but the spirit and the audacity and the ingenuity of these men who not only, they didn't get mad, they didn't get even, they built an institution. They built a church. They channeled that sense of I am, you don't belong, into building something powerful and strong. A church now, as you know, which spans not only the 50 states of the United States, but to Canada and to Africa and the Caribbean and beyond. So I want to lift up right now Richard Allen and Absalom Jones and the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Now, North Carolina, I want to acknowledge the important cusp that North Carolina represents in this moment by also remembering the significant role that North Carolina has played in the transformation of America. You see, the founding fathers were brilliant men. They were brilliant men with a significant blind spot. And while they wrote these incredible words, they left out all black people, they left out all women. So we know that, but this is the point. Generations since then have embraced the role as what I call perfecters of the vision. Lincoln and Frederick Douglass were perfecters of the vision. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a perfecter of the vision. Martin Luther King was a perfecter of a vision. The 4 students in Greensboro in 1960 were those that believed, and they wanted to challenge the nation to perfect the vision that all men, and I say all people, are created equal. North Carolina has made great contributions. Mickey Michaud and Julius Chambers and Harvey Gantt, Mel Watt, J.K. Butterfield. I can name so many important people and institutions that have played a significant role in perfecting the vision. Governors here in the past who embraced the vision in the 70s and the 80s of a new South, a different South, a South beyond Dixie, a South beyond division, a South that I think is on the cusp of emerging at this moment. So we want to acknowledge North Carolina and acknowledge the presence that the organization I'm proud to lead, the National Urban League, with a presence in Winston-Salem and a presence in Charlotte, and the presence of all civil rights advocates and others here in North Carolina, and the work that they've done to bring us to the point where we are today. Now, because this is a sermon or a sermonette, I do want to instruct with a text. May I, Pastor? Got to come correct. So, for today, in Matthew 16:7-12, I won't read it, but let me paraphrase it. The disciples got into an argument because they had run out of bread, this vital food item that they needed to eat. And they were arguing about not having enough bread to eat. Jesus reminded them by saying, don't get amnesia. Don't you remember that with 5 loaves, we fed 5,000 people? Don't you remember that with 7 loaves, we fed 4,000 people? Don't you remember that we were able to respond don't get amnesia. Today, there is circulating in the undercurrent of this midterm election amnesia, a sense of a forgetfulness of not only where we are, but from whence we have come. So I could reach far back to the 1960s and 70s and 80s, or all the way back to Richard Allen or Absalom Jones, but we have a bit of short-term memory. 2.5 years ago, 1,000 days ago, 25 million Americans had lost their jobs. 14,000 Americans, on average at the height, were dying in the world. 14,000 people in the world and 4,500 Americans each and every day. Each and every day. Somehow, some way, as people engage in a present tense discussion, there is amnesia. And some people have forgotten that, yes, there were 25 million jobs lost. Our schools were closed. Our emergency rooms were clogged. Derek Chauvin's knee was on George Floyd's neck. And a movement sprung forth of people in the streets, black people and white people and Asians and Latinos and Jews and Gentiles and Protestants and Catholics and Hindus and Muslims, and people were protesting in New Zealand and in Germany and in suburban communities and urban communities. Have we got amnesia? But then the 2020 election came. And as it came, something interesting happened. Because of the pandemic, many states said we have to make it easier for people to vote and not risk their health. So there was vote by mail, there was early voting, there were voting drop boxes. The result was we had the most successful, highest turnout, least flawed election in modern American history. And after it was over, people started a lie. A lie because you lost. But then, because people voted, this nation began a quick recovery and response. $1,400 checks in every single bank account, a child tax credit, small business grants, grants to state and local governments, eviction moratoria, foreclosure moratoria, an executive order on policing, a Department of Justice enforcing civil rights laws, a black woman on the Supreme Court, a black woman vice president, a black woman on the Federal Reserve Board, and a diverse lineup of leadership in an administration. I'm stating facts, I'm not being partisan, of any in American history. So amnesia, we sometimes forget that our investment in the process of voting made a difference at a material emergency in American history. 25 million people out of work, our schools closed. Now, where are we today? Now, I'm not here to suggest we're in a state of nirvana or perfection, that there is not a tremendous amount more work that needs to be done. Because I know that, for example, whether it was the John Lewis voting rights bill that would put an end to all of this voter suppression, it would have taken effect but for this little thing, this antiquated thing in the Senate called a filibuster. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Like Jesus counseled his disciples to not have amnesia. In these final 2.5, 3 weeks before this election, we must counsel people not to have amnesia, not to forget that they invested in a vote and there is a return on what has occurred to us and for us as a nation. People were dying. People were out of work. Our children were not able to go to school. We couldn't go to the grocery store. I jumped every time my mother called me that she's going to tell me she had COVID. I picked up the phone and my friends say, my daddy's on life support. The experiences that we went through, we cannot allow amnesia and forgetfulness. And our role as leaders, influencers, and we're all leaders in a family, in a neighborhood, in an organization, in a church. Some of you are leaders on Instagram and Facebook. And that's okay too. Use your voice of leadership to say, let's not have amnesia. Let's reclaim our votes. Let's reclaim our votes so that we can have folks to finish unfinished business. I want to say something else. I want to acknowledge the presence of the rabbi here with us today. One thing that is crucial to the work that I do of civil rights and social justice today is that we are building a big tent. We are building a gumbo coalition. We are building a broad tent of people of goodwill, a coalition of the willing and the able who want to build the next generation of this nation. Approximately about a month ago, we were at the White House at a hate crime summit. And it was stunning as we called for that summit right after Buffalo and right after Uvalde to get read into these numbers, where hate crimes against blacks and Latinos and Jews and Asians and those of the Islamic faith have spiked in this country. The reason why we have to build this coalition of the willing, and it has to be multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, of all faiths, is because there's a lingering undercurrent in this nation which seems to want to accept the notion that violence is an acceptable tool in American politics. And because that movement, like all movements, it is a movement that is evil and sinister. But what we've learned over time, the tragedy would not be what those who profess that philosophy do. The tragedy will be the silence of all of us who don't have the will, the willingness to stand up and step up and not only battle it, but to say it is wrong, 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 1,000 times wrong. So we will not get amnesia because we have work to do. And I ask you to go forth in the spirit of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, to stand on their shoulders, to stand on the shoulders that paved the way in the 1950s and the 1960s, to stand on the shoulders of others by not looking back to say, let us recreate yesterday, but to stand on the shoulders because we need to channel their fortitude, channel their sense of urgency, and we need to channel our outrage and our anger right into the polling place and beyond to make a difference here in North Carolina on November the 8th. So carpe diem. It is time for us to seize this day and seize this moment. It is time for us to seize it and begin to create this new, if you will, foundation for 21st century America And I think I was in Georgia yesterday and the day before, and North Carolina today, that this nation's future will be defined by what happens in Georgia, by what happens in North Carolina, states which demonstrate that we have seen the darkness of the past, and we are going to define the light of the future. God bless you, St. Joseph's. God bless you, and thank you.